Okay, we're now live streaming. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 11th of April special board budget meeting. I want to welcome everybody here this evening and start us off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, may I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, seconded by Trustee Gagnon. Any discussion, any changes or amendments to the agenda? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of adopting our agenda with a show of hands, please. And we are on a couple of pages, so if everybody could just leave their hands up a little bit longer this evening so I can make sure that I can count the vote properly. And that is unanimous. Thanks, trustees. Okay, so I just wanted to check in with the Secretary Treasurer. I don't think we have new items under correspondence. I think the pack up, do we have any new correspondence that we should be directing trustees to? I didn't think that there was.
Yes, anything that was received after we closed it off for the April 9th meeting, right up until yesterday, has been included in the agenda package. We did follow up with everyone who sent correspondence to whether or not they wanted their correspondence included and how they would like it redacted. So
Okay.
It is.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a couple of extra days worth of correspondence. Thank you. Okay, trustees, was there anything from correspondence that you wanted to pull for discussion? Okay, sorry, Trustee McNally. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there are two letters from Paula Marchese in there. And there is one that says, that refers to an 11% growth in administration since 2001. And I would just like to pull that out because I wonder which positions account for that.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Just want to turn to the Secretary Treasurer or possibly the Superintendent just to speak to that question.
If we assume that it's 11% growth in the dollar value of the salaries, that would make sense because we've seen increases in the salary grids over that time, probably even higher than that. So I think overall, since that year, we've actually seen a reduction in the number of positions, but offset by an increase in the salaries of those positions because the positions increase at the same rate as the teacher collective agreement. So for example, last year, the increase was 6.75%, for example.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Marchese didn't make it clear in her letter whether she was speaking to an 11% dollar value or an 11% personnel growth. So I guess that answers the question as far as we can decipher what she meant. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to possibly correct what Trustee McNally was saying. It was Gina Cuthbert's letter that is referring to the 11% growth since 2021, not Paula's. So just not putting words into Paula's mouth.
Thank you for the clarification, Trustee Gagnon. Any further correspondence that trustees would like to pull for discussion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Well, I think since we're there, regardless of whether the question is asked now with correspondence or whether it's asked later, I think again with one of, I think as Trustee McNally said, I think there's two letters in there from Paula Marchese, and one of them was to do with the low enrolling trades class. So I just wondered, it sounds like she's interested to know what class it is and how many students it will affect. I can read it out if that, just her questions, if that makes sense, so that I'm not we're all clear on what she's asking. What is the low enrolling trade class that is earmarked as a reduction in next year's budget? How many students will this affect and what school will be affected by this decision? Will this be an ongoing cut rather than a cut just for the year?
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer, I'm not sure if you're best placed to answer that question or possibly the superintendent, but I'll leave it to you to decide.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Associate Superintendent Arts has this response ready.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, this is not a specific class or course that has been targeted. This is additional funds that are provided to high schools to support trades classes, and in some cases there are some low enrollments in order to make sure those run. In these courses, though, the students generate FTE, so it's not always required, because if there are enough students for the courses to run, then it's just a benefit. So there is about 1.7 FTE that's put in, and this is just 0.143 of that. So there's still a significant amount of FTE that's going to go into support these courses, but it is not one specific class that has been earmarked. And my understanding on the package is that it is recommended for ongoing.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent Arts. Is there any follow-up? No? Okay. Okay. Just one final call then, trustees, if there's any correspondence that you wish to pull for discussion. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on. We are now at C. So we've got the various memos and reports, including the multi-year financial forecast. Are there any further items, Secretary Treasurer, that you would like to go over from that section of C of our agenda this evening? Anything you wish to highlight for the board's consideration before we move into, again, our deliberations?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just highlight that I did include a new memo for this meeting. And within that memo, we did respond to some of the questions that were asked at the last meeting. So you'll see a response there to the question period question regarding the student device ratios, as well as the question around student participation numbers for elementary strings and whether or not the program is offered during the timetable or before or after school. So that information is in there. And then just some additional information added around the question that came up around in the enrollment projection. So I'll just highlight that that is included in the agenda package for your information. Otherwise, everything else remains the same.
Thank you very much. And so for people's information, that starts on page 12, that memo with that additional information. Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Trustees, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
All right, just a quick question with the elementary strings. Thank you so much for that information in the table. Just to clarify, so we're all on the same page, in the column that says program offered outside of timetable, I'm assuming that if it's not filled in, then that it means it's inside the timetable. Am I correct in my assumption?
Yes, through the chair, Trustee Kwan, that is correct.
Thank you very much. Any further questions in relation to the additional information that's been added to the memo starting on page 12 of the packet? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to move us along. We are this evening committed to doing a second and third reading of our budget bylaws. And again, the recommended motion, we're now at C2 of our agenda, is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, 2024-2025 annual budget bylaw in the amount of $318,006,345 be read a second time, the 11th day of April 2024. Before I move and look for a mover and a seconder, I just want to pause and provide our partners around the table this evening an opportunity to speak to the recommended motion. Okay, I don't see any hands, but please do stop me if I have missed anybody. All right, trustees, I will now look for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, trustee Kwan, seconded by trustee Mabobi. Any discussion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, hoping it's not too late to just get a little more clarification on a few items. I think the first one that sticks out to me is the line item on our balancing recommendation worksheet with regards to counselors. I know that staff had suggested that there might be a little bit of a change that actually works in our favor as a positive, and I wondered if there was anyone who could actually speak to how that might be looking a little differently.
Thank you, trustee Kwan. I'll turn to the secretary treasurer or indeed the superintendent, whoever would like to speak to that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll pass it over to Acting Associate Superintendent Powell.
Great, thanks. And through the chair, just last night or at the last meeting on Tuesday night that we heard some feedback from the community and also from trustees. We shifted the 0.4 savings at elementary schools across 4 schools so that we could maintain that 0.5 baseline that was referred to. And so we've suggested some other schools that aren't priority schools and they are above that 0.5. We haven't had an opportunity to speak with those schools or the members that it might affect. So if it's okay, I trust through the chair that that'd be okay if we leave it at that.
Thank you, Acting Associate Superintendent. We appreciate you outlining that change and B, you taking away some of the feedback that we heard during first reading and seeing what could be done. So that is appreciated. Thank you. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Sorry, if I may, just a follow up. I wondered, and perhaps that maybe I missed it, but I didn't think I heard what other schools would be affected. I know we talked a little bit, I think, about perhaps the schools that originally were affected, but I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about how that looks and you know, non-priority schools, but what it looks like kind of across the board. Is it just a little bit from every school to make everyone even, or if you could just outline a little bit about the impact to elementary schools in general would be great.
Thank you, trustee Kwan.
Yeah, again, through you to the chair. It's just a 0.1 reduction at 4 elementary schools that are not priority schools, and they are not schools that currently had 0.5. So they are schools that had more than that. And so the reduced 0.1 is a suggestion.
Just a final clarification. So essentially that would mean that all elementary schools at least have a 0.5. So at least have the base.
With the exception of Sundance Bank, yes.
Right. And we're in that again, just for folks that are listening that might not appreciate why that would be, that is our school that only has, how many classes are we up to now at Sundance Bank?
We're currently at 4 classes.
4, yeah. So just to give some context. Thank you very much. Any further discussion, trustees, in relation to our second reading? Yeah, trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Just one other, I think it's to do with district ukulele, and I have heard a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if other trustees received any, but just with regards, I think there's still a little bit of confusion about where that staffing is coming from, only because I think Oak Bay is listed there. So is the staffing coming from Oak Bay? Is it coming from the district? How is that working, and what is the impact on the program?
Thank you, trustee Kwan. Again, I'll turn to staff, whoever is best placed to speak to that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I can answer that. Yes, so there is no impact on the program. So Island Ukuleles has in the past received a block of funding from the district to support that, but they do generate FTE for students in grade 10 to 12 who are in the program. So what the proposal is that whatever FTE they generate, the district will fill the rest of that in, so they have a full block and the program runs. So in theory, if they had no grade 10 to 12 students, the district would provide an entire block. If they had half, the district would provide half of a block. So it really fluctuates based on, but the program will run and it will not be impacted. It will just use the current FTE they generate and the support from the district to generate that block.
Thank you very much. And thank you, trustee Kwan, for the clarification. All right, trustees, again, if anybody would like to speak to or have any further discussion in relation to second reading, now's the opportunity, and if not, then I will call the question. All right, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands, and if again you wouldn't mind leaving your hands up momentarily while I count. All those opposed? Abstentions? Trustee Painter, would you mind indicating your vote, please?
Hello, I'm just troubleshooting a technical issue with Trustee Painter right now.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Is it not possible to get Trustee Painter's vote in some other way, even through the chat?
Let me check. One moment.
Thank
please.
you.
Sorry, Chair. Would you mind repeating the question Trustee Painter is responding to, please?
Certainly. Just wondered what Trustee Painter's vote was, whether he was in favor of second reading, opposed, or abstaining.
Second reading, I am in favor.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay, so again, trustees, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my count indicates that we have all trustees voting in favor with Trustee McNally and Trustee Gagnon opposed. If I've got your votes wrong, please indicate to me verbally, and we'll make sure we amend the record, but that was my count. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Andy, for your assistance. So we are going to move into third reading, trustees. And again, before we do, first I'll read again the bylaw. So that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria.
Sorry, again, I missed it.
Can you hear me now, Trustee Painter?
Yes.
We're just reading the budget bylaw, the third reading, or I am. You're muted, Trustee Painter. Trustee Painter, if you can hear me, you are muted.
No, sorry, my apologies. I'm having technical difficulties and trying to listen on a phone while responding on screen, and it's proving to be a little challenging.
Yeah.
Would it be possible for you to repeat the question?
So I'm just reading the second, or sorry, the third bylaw reading. So I'm just reading the motion, and then I'm going to ask our partners whether they would like to speak to it before we move into debate and before I look for a first and second reader. So I will pause, knowing that you're having technical difficulties. I will be sure to pause and wait to make sure that you've heard where we are before I call the question, before I call the vote, and before we end debate. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Okay, so we're at third reading, and again, the recommended motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, 2024-2025 annual budget bylaw in the amount of $318,006,345 be read a third time the 11th day of April, 2024, and that the Secretary, Treasurer, and Board Chair be authorized to sign, seal, and execute this bylaw on behalf of the board. So I'm gonna, just before I look to trustees for a mover and a seconder, I'm gonna pause and just ask our partners whether they would like to speak to that third reading. Yeah, President Turcotte, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As you're deliberating this, I just wanted to repeat and restate our concern with the impacts that the cuts will have to students, student services, especially the most vulnerable students in the district. I understand the desire for having a minimum of counselors in our schools, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Even a school with fewer students, fewer classrooms, it doesn't mean that the need is less than a school with more classrooms or a higher population. And just to be cautious of the unintended consequences that these cuts and these reductions to student services are going to impact the district. I know it's numbers, you're looking at numbers on paper, but the stories of what students are going through in their families is a really important factor. So thank you.
Thank you, President Turcotte. We appreciate your comments. And again, I just want to pause if any other partners wish to speak in relation to third reading. Okay, trustees, I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder. Would anyone like to move third reading? Thank you, Trustee Mbobi, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee David. Trustees, any discussion? Trustee McNally and then Trustee Gagnon.
At this time, I want to express a deep appreciation for all the people who worked on the committees, which I was unable to be a part of because of a medical issue and partial leave. So thank you to those people who worked so hard in so many meetings, and to staff who have, I'm sure, reached the point of hair pulling of their own hair at times, trying to make this happen and make it work the best way they can. And to fellow trustees, I know everybody's worked really hard to try to make this the best way to achieve a balanced budget. So I want you all to know that you're appreciated.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Much appreciated. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Chair, I would also like to take the time to acknowledge and thank particularly the financial team for their time, their knowledge, their guidance, their answering good questions and bad questions. And that's Katrina, Julie, Hervinder, anybody else in the finance team that I have not yet met. Thank you for that. There's a lot of work, and sometimes we make it even more work just by asking questions. My vote against this budget is not one that is meant to be indicative or against the work of the staff on this. This is a vote that says that I do not approve of a budget that is forcing cuts into services and programs for students. I do not approve of a budget that is forced upon us by a funding model from the province that is woefully inadequate. So I don't approve of the budget is where I'm ultimately at. And I believe that if we were to pass this budget unanimously, it sends the wrong message to our community. It sends the wrong message to our families, our students, the government. It just sends the wrong message. So I will continue to oppose this budget. And I am hopeful that maybe there's a magical funding parachute that the government is sitting on, and it's just going to drop on us at some point between now and election day, but I can't hold my breath for it. And again, thank you to the staff. Thank you to all the people that showed up for all of the working groups, the talking tables, the student symposium. thank you all. Lots of work, lots of good conversation that got us to this point. I'm just sorry that this budget is as woeful as it is. Thanks.
Thank you, trustee Gagnon, trustee Mabobi, and then trustee Kwan, and then trustee Bio.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this budget's a really, really hard one. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the hard work that's gone into this process and what we're working with here. And I especially want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the people who wrote in about our music programs. I initially I became a trustee because that's the thing that stuck out to me the most. And as a musician, it's a pretty big deal. And having to make any budget cuts around music at this point, it doesn't feel like cuts. It feels like we're being robbed of these programs, and it feels like our students are being robbed. And I just can't really see it any other way at this point, and it really breaks my heart to have to approve a budget with these cuts. Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to let that out because it's really quite painful. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Mabobi. Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, so I'll try to keep it a little bit different than my colleagues have, but I want to continue with gratitude. I want to say thank you to everyone here. I want to say thank you to everyone in our district who's on the ground doing the work. I recognize that you are doing a lot with very little. I think we all recognize that. And you know what, you're keeping this district going. You're there for the students. If you were here for other reasons, you'd probably be scared off quite a long time ago with what we're doing with the budget and what funding is happening in education. So yeah, I think really the message here for me is, you know, we see that this budget it is going to make impacts. We've tried to mitigate, you know, large places in pockets where it would be a large cut and mitigate it kind of across the board. But make no mistake, we're going to feel this. And so, you know, there's many staff members who are out there who are going to have to operationalize this. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. We know you're doing a lot with a little.
Thank you, trustee Kwan. Trustee Mabobi, no, sorry, trustee Bio, and then trustee Painter.
Yeah, I probably will sound a bit like a broken record, but I also would like to thank everyone who worked on putting this together. When you look at, you know, this size of a budget and this level of a deficit, it seems like an impossible task. And it kind of is, because there isn't a way we can do this that is equitable, because really, I think we should not be put in the position to do this. I think ideally, education would be funded above and beyond our needs. And I think we're really in a situation where what students need is not accurately represented by the budget and by our funding. Students need artistic expression, students need music, students need mental health supports, and students need to have the supports around them that are completely enveloping and are just going to be there for them the moment they need it. And it's not happening with the way that we are funded. And as a result, we are having to put forward a budget that I think all of us are not enthusiastic about, because it's not what we would like to see in the school district. That being said, actually putting it together and working out ways to make it work and fulfill our legal obligations is an enormous task that our staff have been working nonstop on. So yeah, kind of a combined expression of my personal disappointment in how this has turned out, but also appreciating that the fact it turned out in any way is due to a lot of hard work and a lot of people trying to make the best of a really tough situation. So thank you.
Thank you, trustee Bio. Trustee Painter.
Hey. I I'm trying not to create an audio loop here. If it becomes distracting, please let me know. I'm listening on the phone and speaking on the computer. I'd like to start off with a couple of questions. The first one had to do with student participation rates within the existing strings program. That was one I raised on Tuesday. I was wondering if we have any additional information on that.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. I'll turn to staff. I know you were going to do your best to bring as much information around that as you could. And so I'll just turn the floor over to whoever can best speak to that.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, I provided the information that I was able to on page 13 of the packet by school, the number of students participating and the number of grade 5s in the school. So that was the participation rate I was able to provide.
Did you have a follow-up, Trustee Peter?
Yes, sorry. Juggling technology. The next question had to do with counseling rates, and the current budget proposes dropping a number of elementary schools below 0.5 FTE. This is something that is near to my heart because it was part of the an initiative that I was involved with a number of terms ago. I believe the superintendent was going to look into perhaps student numbers. I'm more interested in actual caseloads, and I know that on past occasions I've been able to track this down through the YFC coordinators. But right now, is there any information about staffing or student ratios for these schools?
Through the chair to Trustee Painter, I'm sorry about your tech issues tonight. I spoke about it about 10 minutes ago to let you know we heard what you said on Tuesday, and proposing 4 schools that are not priority schools, and they're all above 0.5, and each of those are proposed to lose or to be reduced by 0.1 in staffing of their counseling.
No, I thank you. I do understand the approach. My concern is that one in particular, James Bay Community School, is perhaps not one of the priority schools, but definitely a school that we've had interest in the past, and one that I believe was targeted for community link support. And that one, seeing that school in particular on this list, was a cause for concern for me.
Through the chair.
And I didn't phrase that as a question, so I didn't really give you much to work with there. I'm going to take a moment to have a look through the strings participation rates. That's an issue I really have to feel that we're doing the best we can before I can support this. So I do realize that we're talking rounding errors in a budget this size, but I'm also mindful that for a good number of years, we've been eroding different aspects of our delivery, whether it's student support, whether it is technology, our facilities management. I really think that we're going to have to rethink our entire approach to budget management, especially if we are projecting continuing structural deficits into the future. I just don't think that's manageable, and I am concerned that we're losing a clear view of the overall objectives as we focus on individual details. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Trustee McNally, did you have something that you wanted to add? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
While we're talking about schools that are priority schools, that means some schools aren't priority, and this is the context. So I just would like someone to concisely clarify what we mean in this context by a priority school, because if I were a parent of one of the schools not on that list, I'd be thinking, what? My kid's school is not a priority school? I mean, they all are, but in this context, could somebody just clarify what we mean by that?
Yep, thanks, Trustee McNally. I'll turn to staff. We have 10, and I'll turn to staff.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, Trustee McNally, I think all of us do agree that every school is a priority and every student is a priority. And so just to be clear, when we're speaking about priority schools, we have identified 10 of the 28, and again, saying all of them are priority, specifically 10 with vulnerabilities with priority students as termed by the ministry, and also as complexities that are a bit more than some of the other schools. And so we have identified and intentionally supported those 10. Those 10 don't always stay as the same, but we certainly look at it year to year and identify them with additional supports based on historical knowledge and based on the knowledge we have moving into the next year. So again, thank you for the clarity, because I do think it's important that people hear from everyone that every school and every student is a priority for all of us.
Thank you, Trustee McNally, and thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Painter, yeah, you had something further you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to thank Trustee Kwan for pushing the updated counseling numbers to me, and I apologize that I had not been able to take this information in. The proposal that was laid out in the email is one that I can live with. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Trustee Painter, and thank you, Trustee Kwan. Okay, folks. For my part, I will be brief, but and I thank my colleagues, I think, who've covered a lot, and there's a lot of agreement around the table around the areas of frustration and difficulty. This is by no means the first year that we've been dealing with shortfalls, and unfortunately, we know it won't be the last. I think it is really important that we acknowledge that in that context, we are constantly asking all of our staff to make do with less, and that makes an already complex and nuanced job of supporting young people even more difficult. So just want to create some space to say thank you so much for everything that you all do. And that it is not a place we want to continue to be. There is a really important advocacy piece that we as a board want to do. We're going to talk about some of that later on in our agenda. But it isn't just about letter writing. It is also about taking opportunities to collaborate together, to bring all boards of education, all partners around the table together to really make it clear that it isn't sustainable, that there must be more money directed to public education, and there must be more creative solutions when it comes to collaborations across different portfolios in government, whether that be health, whether that be MCFD. There are opportunities, and I'd like to think that there's a lot of very knowledgeable, creative folks who could make those collaborations come to life and help to alleviate some of the pressure that is falling to public education. That said, we also have a legal obligation, and that is always difficult for boards in situations like this, where we do have an ongoing shortfall. We do have to balance our budget. We don't have a choice. It is our legal obligation. So we talked about this when we met on the 9th, the sort of combined both, the political and advocacy role that we play, but also the role as a board that we play around fiscal management and governance. And sometimes those two roles make this particular job in public education particularly difficult. But we did work very hard, and staff worked very, very hard to try to mitigate some of the impacts. it isn't ideal to be having to look to supply budgets or travel. We know that those also, cutting those budgets also have impacts. What we were trying to do was to not have to reduce staff as much as possible. So I know there's a big advocacy piece, and I know that there's a lot of pressure in the system because there hasn't been adequate funding for so many years. Thank you to everybody that you continue, your continued work. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you again to staff. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be here again next year, but I'm hopeful that our advocacy, especially if we come together, can be effective. So without further ado, unfortunately, it is that time. We do need to vote. I am going to call the question. Thank you everyone for your contributions around the table this evening. All those in favor of third reading with a show of hands. All those opposed? Okay, so that is the balance of the board in favor of third reading with Trustee Gagnon and Trustee McNally opposed. If I've got that vote wrong in any way, please let me know now and we'll correct the record. All right, thank you, trustees. And thank you again to our staff who've supported us to get to this point. I want to turn us now to new business. So we have a number of motions that we want to consider this evening. You'll find those under D, and the first motion for consideration is under D1. This is the District K-12 Literacy Grant related motion. The motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to reallocate an additional 0.074 FTE or $10,000 of the district K-12 literacy grant funding to support literacy collaboration at the 10 priority elementary schools. Trustees, may I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Kwan, seconded by Trustee Gagnon. Before I move us into debate, trustees, I just want to pause. We do have a number of motions to consider tonight, but I do want to pause and just, make space for our partners who may have comments or questions or something to say in relation to each of these motions. So again, partners around the table this evening, if you do have anything that you would like to add in relation to this motion, please feel free. Okay. Trustees, we have a mover and we have a seconder. Any discussion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think all trustees can say that, we've heard loud and clear from these priority schools that collaboration is a big thing. I think there's another motion coming up where there's a little bit more talk about collaboration as well. Like we've heard that is a necessity, and not just, among teachers or among EAs and among themselves, but as staff in general at schools. And so, I think it's a very little bit, but, hopefully we can go in the right direction and look to add some of that collaboration and how that looks. We've got new reporting practices, we've got new things coming in, new assessments, or the way we assess, I shouldn't say new assessments, the way we assess, we've got new things coming in all the time, requirements. So, I think collaboration is a big part of that. And I, for one, I think it's a great idea to look for ways that we can add that.
Trustee Kwan. And just for clarity, folks, it basically layers in an extra $1,000 for each of the 10 priority schools. Trustees, would anyone else like to speak to this before I call the question? I don't see any hands, so I want to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Trustee McNally, were you waving because you were voting or because you actually wanted to speak to the motion?
I'll wave to vote too, but I was waving because it suddenly struck me. I'm probably way off base on this, but we've just passed the budget. And it seemed to me that every penny is allocated already. And so does it make sense to, I approve of this, but does it make sense to start moving money around now? I don't know. Chair, could you answer that? I'm really confused.
Well, I can certainly just clarify. So this is a reallocation within the same budget that we've just approved. So we're not increasing the budget that we've just approved. We're simply reallocating some of the funds. Staff, did you want to add anything in addition to that? Nope. Okay. Trustee Kwan, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, sorry, and just a further clarification. My brain is not reaching my mouth tonight, but I think it's even further. We're not reallocating from one area to another. It's a reallocation even just within the literacy budget. So so it's not coming from anywhere else. It's just looking at how we use this fund.
Does that help, Trustee McNally? Okay. Okay, wonderful. All right, thanks, folks. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, so we are moving on. Our next motion is related to a hiring freeze. So the motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria direct the superintendent to implement a district-based staff hiring freeze, so excluding school-based staff, for the balance of the 2023-24 financial year, and further bring any urgent hiring requests to the Board of Education for consideration. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, seconded by Trustee Mabobi. Again, I just want to pause for a moment before we launch into deliberations to make space for our partners who might have comments or questions around this motion. Okay, I don't see any hands. So trustees, would anyone like to speak to this motion? Trustee Painter, go ahead.
This is proving to be an interesting night. I'm mindful that we have a number of key district staff people, particularly in technology, who are going to be seconded or otherwise departing from the district for a period of time. Would this freeze impact their replacements?
I'll turn to the superintendent to speak to that. Superintendent Whitten?
Through the chair, I can share that we have already put in action most of the replacement plan, but not all of it. So there will be some gaps. If this is effective tonight, there will be some pieces that are not yet done. So I'm hopeful that we could just continue with that process for the replacement of Andy.
Secretary Treasurer, would you mind just sort of clarifying that? Just in terms of the budget requirements, or are you saying that you're aware of a financial or a recruitment related financial need that is not already addressed?
No, there isn't a financial need. It's more around the hiring freeze potential impact. So with Andy being seconded, another exempt staff has moved into his role in an acting status, and then another QP has moved into their position in an acting role. And so we have a QP position currently that is being looked at to be posted. So that's just the final piece of that is outstanding.
Thank you. No, we appreciate the update. Okay, and the clarification. Okay, trustees, would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Not seeing any hands, so I will move us into a vote. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. All those, oh, okay, so that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so our next motion for consideration tonight is a crossing guard services funding motion. That the Board of Education of School District Number 61 Greater Victoria direct the board chair to write to the District of Saanich, Mayor and Council imploring them to fully fund crossing guards on municipal roads in Saanich in line with the full funding for these services received by all other municipalities in Greater Victoria, as well as in line with their obligations of ensuring road safety under the BC Motor Vehicle Act. May I have a mover and a seconder? That's moved by Trustee Painter, seconded by Trustee Mabobi. And again, I just want to hold some space before trustees, we get into our debate for partners around the table tonight who may have comments or questions around this motion. Okay, I don't see any hands. So trustees, would anyone like to speak to this motion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm just reminded that this was also an item that was included on the budget balancing list. And so, this is important to ensure that that we are going to receive this fund so that, that we're covered and we're paying for the individuals that are employed by the school district to keep those intersections safe. So yeah, definitely in favor.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I'd appreciate some clarification, and I do understand it may not be available at this time, but do we have a sense of how long the funding that has currently been provided by districts of Saanich is going to last? Are we potentially going to hit a point at this time of the year where we don't have the financial capacity to provide crossing guards under the current model?
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Secretary Treasurer.
Through the chair, this is the same situation that we're in the current year, except for that the district itself is funding the shortfall. The move in this particular budget is to budget for the revenue from the District of Saanich in the hopes that we will receive it. If by chance we don't receive the revenue from them, we will essentially be creating a deficit for ourselves. So it could be a temporary fix to our shortfall, or we could be successful in receiving money from the district, which would help to offset the costs that we're incurring. At this time, there are quite a few intersections that we staff in the District of Saanich. They have a policy in place that identifies kind of a point system as to which intersections they would be eligible for funding. So there are only 5 intersections that they currently fund, and then their practice has been to only fund 50% of those intersections. So that it is possible that if we don't get the money from the district, we will be looking at a shortfall up to 127,000.
Thank you, trustee. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Sometimes you feel like a trustee. Secretary Treasurer, thank you so much. So just to clarify for Trustee Painter and those around the table tonight, we basically halfway through the school year would be the approximate point where we would need to have secured the funding. Is that correct, Secretary Treasurer?
Wouldn't be halfway through the year because I believe there are 14 or 15 intersections we staff. They only fund 5 and half of 5. So it wouldn't be too far really into the school year where that funding would be depleted.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. So that gives us an idea of the speed with which we need to launch into advocacy around this. Any other questions or discussion, trustees? Okay, I'll just quickly add, I think this is one of those areas where the District of Saanich sort of sticks out amongst all the other municipal partners who are fully funding. And so I think we need to, highlight that and engage in some discussions very soon about how to address it. And if we are unable to reach an acceptable conclusion to those discussions, then we will need to come back to the table and decide how we are going to address it. So I'm most certainly in favor of the motion. Okay, I'm just going to look one more time to my colleagues if anyone else would like to speak to this before I call the question. Okay, all those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so our next motion is related to elementary strings and the hub model. The Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to prepare a plan for how an elementary strings hub model will be equitably delivered, including locations, time of day, and schools allocated to each hub by June 2024, and further provide a list of recommendations on how grade 5 students who won't have a strings program at their school will safely travel to the hub. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and a seconder, Trustee McNally. Thank you. Again, I'm going to pause and look to our partners if anybody would like to add anything in respect to this motion. Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to turn back to trustees. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm not sure anyone would disagree with this one. I think it's really except for maybe the person who has to put the work in to get the information. But I think we really just want to know how the hub model is going to work. I think parents and teachers want to be certain about what that's going to look like. And of course, we want our students to be able to access the program, and we want them to be safe when getting there, especially if it's an elementary school that isn't having it at their own school and has to travel somewhere. So it's basically the nature behind it.
Yep, thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any other trustees would like to speak to this motion before I call the question? All right, not seeing any hands, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. And again, that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so our next motion for consideration tonight is a motion around music equity and the creation of an ad hoc committee. The motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to prepare a draft elementary strings and middle school music equity ad hoc committee terms of reference and present it to the Education Policy and Directions Standing Committee meeting in June 2024. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, seconded by Trustee McNally. Again, partners around the table this evening, feel free if there is anything you want to add, any comments you have in relation to this motion. Okay, trustees, would anyone like to speak to this motion? Okay, I wouldn't mind just briefly, just again, for the benefit of folks who were not part of putting the motions together or didn't, those around the table tonight. Again, this is just really so that we can focus ourselves. We have a process and a committee that's just tasked with addressing our ongoing need to look at planning and to stabilize our music programs. We have heard very loud and clear from our community and from trustees around the table that this is a priority. And so this is just providing us a mechanism by which to have the discussions and to plan for the future of our music programs and hopefully to stabilize the situation so that we're not every year looking at potential cuts. So I definitely support it. And again, just want to provide my colleagues with an opportunity to speak to the motion. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing here is equity. I said it last meeting on Tuesday, and I'll say it again, is there are many students who participate in our music programs who, might be able to access it outside of school if it wasn't provided in school. But there's many students who can't, and the only way they're going to access music classes or any kind of music is through school. So I think we just really need to make sure that we are providing music classes that are doing that, and that you know, that we're making sure that those students who need it the most are getting the services.
Trustee Kwan. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion, trustees? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Our next motion this evening is around collaboration time for elementary schools. The motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to undertake a cost-benefit analysis, including assessing the impacts of implementing a short school day once per month at elementary schools to support school-based collaboration, and provide a recommendation or recommendations to the Board of Education by December 2024. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Kwan. I'm going to pause and look to our partners if they have any questions or comments. President Massey. Yeah, hi, nice to see you. The floor is yours when you're ready. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Yeah. I just want to say collaboration is a wonderful thing. And when I see that, my only concern is when we had shortened days previously at elementary schools, that QP staff were not working. And I hope that they don't become part of the cost benefit analysis, and that they are able to be part of that collaboration if that comes to fruition.
Thank you very much, President Massey. We really appreciate you highlighting that important point. Yeah. Thank you so much. Would any other partners around the table this evening like to speak to this motion? Okay, trustees, would anyone like to speak to the motion? Trustee McNally, go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a question about, you know, minutes of instruction. And I know sometimes we've added a minute and a half to the day to make something work elsewhere so that we covered off the, you know, the required minutes of instruction in a year. I mean, I'm all in favor of collaboration and QP being part of that too. It's essential. But yeah, so the minutes of instruction, is that going to be affected or problematic for anybody? I mean, anybody on staff who has to figure it out, through the chair to whoever could answer that.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Perhaps Superintendent Witten or another member of staff can provide their initial thoughts on that aspect of things.
Yeah, thank you, and a great question, Trustee McNally. So yes, we would add minutes of the day. What we would be looking at in both terms is going back to President Massey's comment of not impacting QP hours to taking them away. We do have hours that are, or minutes that are added because of the second week of spring break. And so we'd be looking at a combination of doing this, but it would not reduce the hours for EAs, but we would, I mean, obviously we would need to do a lot more consultation and conversation as we lead into this whole potential for the following school year. But yes, we would have to add minutes to a day. What we are looking at though is 1 day in a month. So it would not accrue to many minutes.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I spoke earlier about collaboration. I really do appreciate President Massey's comments. I think what we've heard from our budget process this year from a number of different partner groups is that it is important for collaboration to happen, not just within the partner groups, but together. And so, you know, I think that's the, you know, the intent behind this motion.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to offer that while I'm absolutely in support of examining this opportunity, examining the topic to see if there is an opportunity, I am also mindful that shortening school day in some respects may have significant impacts on parents and caregivers, something that we'll have to take into consideration. I'm sure there's options out there, but it's just one I'm very mindful of.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Yeah, most certainly that will end up being part of the considerations that the superintendent considers. Okay, trustees, one more pass just to make sure if anyone would like to speak to this motion, you have a chance to. All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, our next motion this evening is around ministry funding allocations. The motion is that the Board of Education of School District Number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to notify the Board of Education of receipt of any new funds from the Ministry of Education and Childcare received during the school year and make recommendations regarding the allocation of the funds for the board's consideration. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, and a seconded by Trustee Mabobi. And I'm going to turn to our partners again to see if anyone would like to comment or have any thoughts around this. Oh, hello. Nice to see you, Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner. The floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Through the chair. So with respect to the motion, I just wanted to make sure to manage expectations regarding new funds. So with the exception of the September 30th enrollment recount, all of the funds received during the year are targeted for specific purposes. Therefore, there's not really much flexibility in what we could do with the funds. However, with respect to the September 30th enrollment recount, the use of the funds can't really be determined until after the final budget, just because there's so many unexpected things that arise. So it just wouldn't be prudent to allocate the funds before doing the final budget.
Thank you very much, Associate Secretary Treasurer. Appreciate you providing that caution and that context for us. Okay. Any other partners wish to speak to this? And the if not, then I'll turn to trustees. Okay, trustees, would anyone like to speak to this? Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just with what Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner said, my interpretation of this was just if it was like new shiny funding that we have never seen before, like that would be special. But yeah, for the sort of fixed funding, I think we already kind of hear about it when we hear about it, and B, yeah, it's not like we can really do anything with that funding when we hear about it anyway. So yeah, this to me was just like when we got surprise new funding about Feeding Futures, or if that government is holding on a pre-election funding announcement, that would be great. But yeah, that's my understanding and hope with this.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Yeah, it's not very often that we find ourselves in that wonderful, glorious situation where we have new funds to consider how to allocate. But when and if we do, this is how the board wishes to process-wise to handle it. Okay, trustees, would anyone else like to speak to this before I call the question? Right, all those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. All right, thank you, folks. So that brings us to our board advocacy motion this evening, that the Board of Education of School District Number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the board chair to write to the Minister of Education and Childcare and Premier advocating for additional K-12 funding. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, seconded by Trustee David. Well, I'm going to turn first to our partners. If any of our partners would like to speak to this motion. I don't see any hands, but please, if I have missed anybody, then just let me know verbally. Okay, so trustees, would anyone like to speak to this? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, letters are great. Whether they get read or not, I'm not sure. Sometimes we get replies. But I am mindful, and I would remind my colleagues that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong. But I think maybe the last advocacy letter that we wrote regarding funding was actually after the budget process last year. So I would actually just, perhaps look to my colleagues to, keep this in mind, and perhaps we can actually take this a little bit further. And I like to say, make a nuisance of ourselves and perhaps look at more often ways to write and perhaps focus on specific things of what we need funding for, or specific things of where we know inflation has really hurt us, so that it's not just a blanket every time we need more funding, but that we are, at least making a little bit of a nuisance of ourselves with constantly asking and being consistent with it, and reminding perhaps the province why we need this funding with little solid examples of why we need the funding. So that just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, no, thanks, Trustee Kwan. And you are correct. It was last year that we wrote last around funding. And I worked with the Secretary Treasurer to put together some examples for the Minister and Premier around some of the areas where we are really seeing those inflationary cost pressures, pointing out that we in British Columbia are below the national average when it comes to per pupil funding. Try to make it as meaningful as possible in terms of identifying some of those risks that school districts increasingly have when it comes to, for instance, risks associated with network infrastructure that's aging, cybersecurity, and the like. So we tried our best, and we will do the same this year and see if we can even go a little further. We certainly have the benefit. I don't know if I want to call it the benefit, but we certainly have the knowledge of the last year, and we can. I know we can. Thinking of facilities alone and the escalating costs of supplies that they're having to deal with, and again try to figure out how to make their budget go that much further when supplies of the costs have just exploded. So I know that we'll be able to provide even more context like you're suggesting. So yeah, wondered if, yeah, go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
Right, yeah, no, and I don't mean, I didn't mean at all. I think, there was a lot of work that went into that letter, and we really do appreciate you and the Secretary Treasurer doing that on our behalf. I wondered though if it might be more prudent to perhaps choose 2 or 3 things to highlight in every letter and just send more frequent letters. I guess that was really, if I wanted to sum up what I was trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. We did get a response. I want to be fair to the Minister of Education. We did get a response to our last letter. It was a brief response, but it was a response. And at that stage, the government was considering whether or not to, or they were looking at, I think the terminology was that they were looking at the possibility of inflationary funding. And so, I definitely want to encourage them to do more than look and to plan for to funding school districts. Would anyone else like to speak to this? I know we talked about, and Trustee Kwan as well as emphasized the need to, again, collaborate and go beyond letter writing and to look for opportunities to partner with folks within public education to do that. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, so that brings us to the question period portion of our agenda. Associate Superintendent Arts, would you just confirm for me whether there are any question period questions this evening?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, there are no questions in the inbox tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right, so without further ado, I will call for adjournment, but before we do, I just want to take a chance because we rarely get a chance to send someone off with our thanks and well wishes, but our director of IT is going to be seconded for a couple of years. It was mentioned earlier in the meeting, and I believe that today might even be his last day before he starts his secondment. So we will miss Director Canty. We know we're in good hands with the rest of the department, but we just want to say best of luck. We will miss you, but we look forward to seeing you and hearing about your experience. So best wishes from all of us. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, without further ado, thanks everyone for your time this evening, and I will call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Trustee McNally, seconded by Trustee Mabobi. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous.